But until then, we have Rob Silver, we have Matthew Davis, we have Crazy Tobin, and we have Less Than Dave McDonald. Thank you all so much for joining today. Oh, I love the hat, Matt. I love it. I know the podcast, of course. Anyway, take it away, guys. Thanks so much for being a part of this event.
Yes, appreciate it, Nick. How you guys doing?
Great.
Good to see your faces.
Great.
Hey, Maddie.
Hi. Yeah, so our panel is going to be discussing, navigating through a 15-team league throughout the entire season. And we're going to go over 4 topics. We'll be discussing the resources that we use while we're ramping up in the offseason towards our drafts, along with the resources we use in season, roster construction, managing fab over the full season, and then we're going to close things out on streaming strategies to maximize fab. Everybody watching hopefully is familiar with who we are, but if not, I'd like to give you guys a second to go around and introduce yourselves. The way I'm looking at things, it'll go Rob, Dave, and then Toby. So the floor is yours, Rob.
Hey, I'm Rob Silver. I was runner-up for funkiest panelist at PitchCon 2023, and everything else has been downhill since then.
I'm Dave McDonald. High stakes player like these other degenerates with me here. Started with NFBC about 15 years ago, but been playing for a while before then even. We got I'm on Friends with Fantasy Benefits podcast with Justin, and I am not funky enough to be like Rob and Scott Chu here.
Hey everybody, Toby. I also guess I go by Batflip Crazy on Twitter. Have a podcast. In my off days, I am a lumberjack. So that's what we got going.
I'm liking this look you have.
Thank you.
All right. So like Nick said before he handed it off to us, he was discussing what the contributions are going towards, and that is the ALS Association. We're getting close to around 80% of the $10,000 goal. So if you haven't already and you're enjoying what we're doing, please go over to pitcherlist.com/PitchCon, and you can stream this video and read all up on ALS and learn a little bit about that. And that is where you would be able to contribute. So all right, boys, we're going to start off with resources. So each of us, I'm assuming, start off at different times of the year. Some people don't take a break. Some fantasy baseball players do. But when your time does come, then you're ready to begin your preparation. Give us a couple of your resources when getting prepared, so to speak, to get ready for drafting. Toby, let's start with you on a few of the resources that you use.
Yeah, sure thing. So one of the resources that I use that's probably the biggest part of my prep for any kind of 15-team league or really any league in general is just projections. So taking a look at some of the publicly available projections, some of the not publicly available projections. I know everybody's doing it, but the projection aggregation is another key piece, I think, from my perspective on kind of making sure that you have a variety of different perspectives and different types of projections that factor in different information when you're looking at it. And then I think also just thinking about in any given season, there are changes that are coming, like the rule changes that are going to be happening. You want to make sure you know your league really well and what the settings are and being able to adjust and adapt based on that. And then I think also, based on all of those things, also position scarcity, but more importantly, I think categorical scarcity and thinking about how you're going to address those things. So those are some of the things that are kind of going through my mind as I prepare for drafts, both macro level and a little bit on the more micro level.
All fantasy baseball players, we all seem to have a different library, so to speak, right? We all pull out different, it's not obviously books, a few books we still read, like shout out to the Baseball HQ Forecaster and whatnot. But when we go to our, so to speak, library for fantasy baseball and our resources, all of us do have different tendencies of what we like to study, what we like to read up on, what we like to learn, so to speak. So Dave, give us yours, please.
Yeah, I'm trying to be better about using projections more and more as we go along here. Because for the longest time, from when I started, I've been playing for a while. So like there were no good projection systems back when I started playing. So I kind of used other things to gain an edge on the rest of the field. Risk assessment and roster construction, stuff like that. Whereas now I see the value with projections, and you know, I don't think that they're everything, but I like to look at things as more of like a range. Like I like to look at a guy and not say, okay, he's gonna have this many at bats and this many homers and this many steals. I like to look at it and say, okay, I think he can get between this many steals and that many, like 15 to 25, and then like some guys have more upside than others, and you know, it's not just a straight projection for me. I'm looking at that entire range and saying, okay, maybe for my current team, I need a guy who might be able to get me 40 steals, even if his median projection isn't as high as some other guys, you know? So there's so many resources I use. I'm lucky enough to have 3 of my best friends who play with me that we're all on a text string every day. For me, that's a huge resource. I know a lot of you guys have friends that you talk to in the industry as well. It's so nice to have people to bounce ideas off of and stuff. And, you know, especially who are accessible. I mean, I can see 2 of the 3 of them because they live in the same city as me. So it's pretty cool. We can get together and talk about stuff. We don't do that much because one of them is married with kids. And so that would be my co-host on the High Stakes Heat Pod, Jake Hallisker. But throw you under the bus there, buddy. But when we do get together, it's really great to have each other to bounce stuff off of. But another thing I use, and I know we're on PitchCon here, so Nick, shout out. The pitcher list, starting pitcher roundup that Nick does every day is really invaluable because I can't diagnose pitching like Nick can. I don't have that skill. You know, being a good fantasy baseball player doesn't equal your knowledge of the sport necessarily. Like a lot of us don't really. I mean, look at Phil Dussault, came in and dominated. He didn't even know anything about baseball before coming in and developing like his system and everything. Like there's more to the game than just knowing the sport, but knowing the sport gives you that added advantage. And I'm trying to add that to my skill set more this offseason and trying to develop myself as a player. And that's the thing. You always have to constantly evolve because people are getting smarter and smarter and better. So if you stay the same, you're going to get left in the dust.
I like the text chain comment that you made because there are certainly a lot of us that do have our tiny little click, you know, of group text messages and stuff like that, and bouncing off ideas and learning from one another, or arguing, or you know, not agreeing with something as well. Yeah, a lot of debate as well. And Rob, I know that you love
who's in
debates.
yours, Maddie? Who you got in yours?
You know, I actually don't have one.
Well, that's the saddest thing I've ever heard, Maddie.
I don't have a full. I know I don't have a full blown
You're looking
like
for
chain,
friends, buddy.
like I know Rob, Scott, Matt, and Vlad. You know, they have theirs. I don't have one like that, but I do kind of keep things close with Zach Betancourt, who I'll share a couple of main events with, and then other than that, I'll just every once in a while shoot a random text message to somebody, and just, you know, maybe ask their thoughts on something. But other than that, I don't actually have a full group text chain like you guys. Not cool enough yet.
You're totally cool enough, Maddie. I just want to let you know that.
Yeah.
Rob, sure. how about you, Rob? I know that you are somebody that gets off to drafting your fantasy baseball leagues a bit later than most people. So what are the resources, and why do you wait a little bit longer? I'm kind of curious about that.
Yeah, my first draft this year will be in Las Vegas in March. Yeah. It's in part because the DCs annoy the crap out of me, so they just bother me. I like to go to bed not worried about I'm going to be on the clock and I'm going to have to draft at some point at 2 a.m. And I know there's a pause, but it doesn't work with my lifestyle. First off, Dave, I like that you called your friend's wife and kids the bus, basically. I think that's interesting. You know, I think the biggest challenge I have, and I may be alone on this in terms of resources, is actually narrowing things down. There's so much information out there now, and there's so much contradictory information, and there's so many opinions on. Am I giving echoes off, or is that not just what I hear?
Well, everybody mute your mic real quick, and then Rob, take the floor, and we'll see what happens there.
I think I sound awesome, but I don't want to. If it's not so awesome for everybody else, I don't want.
You sound great, Rob.
Thank you. I find it really, it takes a lot of discipline for me to shut up the noise. There are so many podcasts, there's so many great websites out there. So I really just try to be disciplined about doing my own work, doing my own thing. I am a projections guy, so that's the base. But then I try to dive into every single player, which is a lot of players. I mean, that's the other reason why people ask me, like, why don't you draft like the psychopaths in November, December, January? It's not just because I like to sleep. I'm not ready. I'm not ready until March to really draft. Like, could I hack my way through a draft? I'm sure I could hack my way through a draft, but I really need the full off season to be ready. Because if you're going player by player, it's a friggin' lot of work. I also try to spend a lot of time on roster construction strategy, on draft strategy, on just kind of the approach on building backwards. We'll get into some of this, but yeah, I mean, the base ultimately is getting a projection. I agree with Dave. It's not a binary. I like probabilistic thinking as well, range of outcomes. Like, I do spend a lot of time on that as well. And that also just takes a lot of time. It's much easier if you just take the aggregator and show up in a draft with your SGPs and draft off of that. But I'm not sure that's quite enough. As Dave said, the competition's too tough, I think, to get away with that these days.
Yeah, it's interesting how you said that you're just not prepared right now, and I only do one 400 DC each month, so January, February, and March. I'll do one a piece, and I was talking to Vlad about how the each previous one, it's just like, what was I thinking? What was I thinking? What was I thinking? Like, it's just a total Rubik's cube, and it constantly changes. And I'm like, well, I'm a little bit sharper now than I was last time. I'm a little bit, maybe I'm not, but that's actually my my train of thought on that is, I look back at the draft boards, and the earlier ones just, they aren't as appealing as what is currently going on. So let's get into roster construction. Robbie kind of hinted as that in a segue. Do you guys can kind of just freelance how you want to discuss your roster construction? If you want to say, Toby, you've been commonly known for, coining the term pocket aces, or drafting in the first two rounds of your picks, starting with two starting pitchers. If you guys want to discuss how you like to start drafts, or just a macro point of view of roster construction, Toby, let's start with you.
All right. So I think the biggest thing with a 15 team league, and maybe how it differs a little bit from shallower leagues like the 12 team leagues or the 10 team leagues, one of the things that I like to think about is just trying to minimize my reliance on streaming pitchers throughout the course of the year. The player pool is so much worse in 15 team leagues. Like when you're working off of fab or trying to identify, starting pitchers you want to put in your lineups. I think that is something that I'm always thinking about. And to your point, Maddie, that's why I tend to prioritize, high strikeout, high volume pitchers early on in drafts, who also come along with those really strong ratios, because I think, the combination of volume and ratios, I think, is a really important one, so that you have to be relying less on streaming. And when you do, you've already built that solid foundation already. I think just one other thing that I'd point out about roster construction is, it's a lot more challenging as well, because the player pool is so much shallower, to be able to get meaningful contributions on from the waiver wire throughout the course of the year. Obviously, there's guys that kind of pop out and you may get lucky and identify them, but it's going to be really, really challenging. So one of the things that I try to do when I'm building my roster is focusing less on, getting players that contribute a significant amount in one or two categories, so like your rabbits, if you will, staying away from them and trying to broaden or spread out as much as possible contributions across categories, because that way, when you do have an injury or you get underperformance from one particular player, it tends to have less of an impact on you. I think with some of the changes in the ball from last year, I think there is a little bit more of an opportunity, like with home runs and maybe with speed with the stolen bases that are happening, to shift that a little bit. But I generally like to spread the risk, if you will, in each of the categories to make sure that I'm not going to be in a lot of trouble if one guy goes down. So those are some of the things that I'm thinking about as I think about building rosters for 15 team leagues in particular.
Well done. And shout out to you for coming up with this, the topics that we have today. That's all you. That was good stuff by
Well,
you. So
I
kudos.
threw out 3. Dave threw in some other ones. It's just like a team effort. I can already feel it.
Yeah, when we got the email from Nick, it certainly felt like project management back in business school. But Mr. Silver, give us your thoughts on your roster construction or your considerations on that.
So first off, I agree with Toby in terms of streaming pitching in 15 team leagues. I think it's death. Sometimes you have no choice. But when I hear people going in with it as an approach, I think to myself, that is a bold move. Sometimes you have to do it, but you should not go, in my opinion, in planning to do it. It is very, very, very hard to do successfully, consistently. So when I'm planning my roster construction, I go from the top and I go from the bottom. I first off like having a sense of what I think I can acquire relatively late in drafts. I'm not the first person or the last person who talks about building rosters from the back up, but I think it is a good approach. If you think that there are 5 or 6 outfielders you like in rounds 20 to 25, so you're going to want to get 1 or 2 of them, that leads to certain decisions. If you have a bunch of closer sleepers that you think are if you are absolutely convinced Daniel Bard is going to run away with the closer job and have a fantastic season, and you can get Daniel Bard, in the last 5 rounds of your draft in March, then it's probably silly to spend the 3rd or 4th round on 2 closers. So I think it is important, first off, to start from the back half as opposed to using it as an afterthought. Recognize, though, that we can fall into the trap of arrogance, which is the hit rate on those late picks is extremely low, even for the best of players. So, yes, I think you should build from the back up. Also recognize you may be left, instead of Daniel Bard, with name one of the 20 other relievers who you're going to have to cut after 2 weeks because they don't have the closer's job and you can't carry them anymore. Number 2, like Toby said, I like starting with a strategy, depending where I'm drafting in the draft. How am I going to tackle starting pitching in the NFBC in particular, but really in any fantasy format? I think it does not work well for me going into a draft saying, look, the pitching will come when the pitching comes. Let's just see how the room plays itself out. I have my values, and when I see a good value, I'm going to get it. I've tried that before, and there are people who can have huge success doing that. I am not one of them. I need to know this is how I intend to approach starting pitching. Doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work out. Doesn't necessarily mean I write the names down before the draft, but I need to have a general sense. Sometimes it's a 1st round pitcher. I've certainly done that before. Sometimes this year may be a great year to say I'm going to get three of the following 9 starting pitchers in rounds 4, 5, and 6, and then I'm going to go again to starting pitching in round 11. There's no one way to do it. I think I like having a strategy going into drafts, though, about where do I hope to get my starting pitching and what do they kind of look like. Also, a lot of us, and maybe Toby's to blame for this, think about these are the first 2 starting pitchers I want to get. I think one of the big things, if you agree with the premise, I want to avoid streaming. I want to, if I am streaming starting pitching, then I've screwed up somehow, or injuries. I mean, that's just the reality of baseball with pitchers. It's as important to have a pretty good sense, this is where I want to get my starting pitcher 6, 7, 8, 9 for my bench. And the answer to that could be here's a group of 10 starting pitchers in rounds 18 to 22. I'd be thrilled with any of these 10 pitchers as my SP 7, 8. But again, I think there are too many people, especially when they're starting out, who it's I know who I like. I have my values. Let's see how the draft plays itself out. I think that leads to some bad decisions. And then the last one is closers, especially once we get into March. We've all been there. Things get weird when you're there live, and that doesn't mean necessarily they go early. They can go later. You can have you have always runs on closers. Again, there's no one right answer on how to tackle closers, but I think you want to go in with an approach. This is how I hope to do it. I want to pay up for closers to avoid fabbing crappy closers all year, or I don't want to pay up for closers. I want to get two of the following, like middle to bottom level closers, and see how that works out. It can all work. I guess the big takeaway of my rambling answer is have a plan, have a strategy, be agile enough to adjust to the nature of what the table gives you. But I think that for me, at least, just going in saying, I've done my homework, let's see how this goes, just doesn't lead to great results.
Yeah, we can have a draft blueprint, so to speak, and hopefully it goes to plan. To piggyback real quick before going to you, Dave, though, when mentioning if you're going into the draft with the thought of not wanting to have to stream pitchers heavily, if there's injuries, of course, that throws a wrench in the road. But if you're going in saying, oh, I can probably just stream this last, the SP8 or SP9. It also trickles down into your fab, right? So you already know that you're going to just be churning and burning so much. And I don't think you necessarily want to be allocating that much fab towards the volatility at the pitching, that you're taking on risk there. And then you're also blowing your budget in one area. Whereas how are your closers? How if a big hitter goes down, how are you going to fill that spot, et cetera? So yeah, I definitely think building or at least thinking you have a solid pitching foundation, not having to look at free agency going into opening day, thinking I need to start one of these guys is probably a good plan. Dave, let's get into your construction considerations.
Yeah, so going last here, I heard you guys talk about a lot of the stuff that I was planning to talk about. So I'll just kind of expound on some of what I heard you guys say.
I'll give you the floor first for the managing fab then.
No, that's fine. Actually, I'd prefer not to for that one. But,
Okay.
I'm if the biggest weakness to my game is my fab management. I've made that very clear on a number of occasions. Would have won a lot more money if I had some fab left at the end of the season. So kids, always you need to keep enough fab at the end of the season. Doesn't have to be a lot, but like $50 for a couple weeks at the end of the season is you're like living like a king. I mean, it's so important. But anyways, we'll get into that later. So yeah, Toby was kind of talking about this. Both of them mentioned the back to front roster construction. That's something that I do as well. You're looking at what can I get later on in the draft, because then that'll help focus in on what I need, or that'll help narrow down my focus to what I need in the early part of the draft. Because if I feel comfortable getting power later in the draft, now granted, a lot of us thought that last year and did not work out very well. But you're looking at the draft, you're saying, okay, I can get this later in the draft. So then early in the draft, I can't get this stuff later. So that's what I'm going to focus on early, and whether that's, really high average guys or stolen base guys. And for me, and Toby kind of mentioned the rabbits, the stolen base guys who you don't want to rely on one or two guys to get you all your steals. You want to spread it out amongst a bunch of players. The problem is that a lot of those players that give you steals suck in real life. They're bad hitters. They're bad players. They're going to lose their job. They're going to, a lot of those guys, those are the guys that I avoid. If you're relying on John Berti to do what he did last year, that's a risky proposition. Like if you're drafting your team and you're thinking, I'm good in steals because I've got Berti, players like him who just aren't good players, those guys can lose their job. They can get bumped down to ninth. They can go to the bench. And now where are you going to get your steals? And that's a very competitive thing to be trying to get in fab, because everybody's going for those guys. It's easy to find, usually easy to find guys who can give you a couple home runs in a week or something like that. But to find guys who can get you steals, who are going to be playing most days, it's really tough in a 15-team league especially. So the problem is a lot of those stolen base guys go early in the draft. I want to be targeting the guys who give me all the categories, or at least, home runs and steals, and who I don't think are going to lose their jobs. But again, the problem is that those guys go in the first couple rounds for the most part. So a lot of my draft strategy usually is built around finding enough of those guys early and then still getting everything else. They're talking about you need to get a solid closer. You need to get some starters who you can rely on. If you feel good enough this year, I feel like in past years, it felt like you needed to take starting pitching really early to feel like you could build a good rotation. in the NFBC, at least in these 15-team leagues. This year, right now, looking at the ADP, it kind of feels like rounds 4 through 7 have some really good starters. But I also know come March, those guys are all going to get jumped up a round or two. So, we're going to see Kevin Gaussman going in the 3rd round instead of the 5th round, I'm betting, stuff like that.
Right.
So I'm always looking at where can I get the players that I need early on, because I know what I can get later in the draft. So that's going from back to front. Rob, I think you made an excellent point when you're kind of talking about knowing your strengths and weaknesses, and this is different for every player. If you know that you can't find closers in season well, then you need to make sure you're drafting good closers in the draft, because if you're not good at following along and figuring out and picking guys up before they get the job, because once they have the job, you're going to be spending a ton of fab to try to acquire them, and you're going to be competing with probably 12 or 13 other teams in your league to try to get them. So, you got to know your strengths. I've heard Nick talk about the fact that he we lost Rob. I hear Nick talk a lot about how, he knows pitching well, so he wants to invest more in his early hitters because he feels more comfortable evaluating pitchers that he can pick up throughout the year. So, knowing your strengths and, more importantly, your weaknesses is huge. And then also, once you are ready to draft and you're looking at your draft strategy, you then want to develop your draft strategy around, okay, where am I going to be picking in the draft? Are you someone who wants to draft in the middle or on an end? Those are very, very different strategies. If you're drafting in the middle, you don't have to wait super long for the picks to come back to you every time, so you can afford to take guys who fall their values. Whereas if you're drafting on either end, you can't really do that because you know the resources that you need to get, and you have to take guys to get you those. So you have to just get your guys if you're drafting on either end. You can't just draft the best value at every pick, because then you're probably going to be missing on something. So you have to know where you're comfortable drafting. And for me, typically, I'm much more comfortable drafting in the middle. I think most of my kind of the opposite of Rob. Most of my successful teams have been when I'm picking in that 5 to 11 range, pretty much. So whenever I can, but I'm always looking is there a reason to draft late? Is there a reason to draft first? Is there a dominant number 1 overall player? It's not like fantasy football, really, where there's that 1 or 2 guys who you have to have, at 1 or 2. You had the Hanley Ramirez years where he was by far the best player. But we really haven't had that since then. Right now, we've got 6, 7 guys who are kind of very similarly skilled at the top of the draft. And most people are yeah, I'm fine with Julio Rodriguez or Acuna or Trey Turner, J-Ram. If you're comfortable with any of those guys kind of similarly in the position doesn't matter as much to you, then you don't need to have the first overall pick. So I'm also looking at if I'm drafting late, is there a guy going kind of early second round that I think is should be going in the first round? A couple of years ago, in 2020, I identified that as Shane Bieber. So I liked the back end because then I could get Bieber in the early second before he was off the board. And I felt like I was getting 2 first round picks. So there's so many considerations when you're going through all this stuff that you need to be constantly thinking about. It's very complex, but that's what makes this fun. I enjoy the strategy aspect and the roster construction and all that, but it is very important to do that. It's something that as you play this more, you'll develop it more and more, but it's also different every year. It depends on where players are falling, where you think the values are. So that's how I feel.
Dave, do you set your KDS more centered towards the middle? Your preference usually?
Yeah.
It depends on the season.
It depends on the season. If I don't see a big reason to go early or late and I can do, whatever, I would definitely prefer to be in the middle.
And Toby, I know Dave talked about maybe having some uncomfortableness with drafting, let's call it the turn on, pick 15, pick 16. That's somewhere that every draft I'm in with you, I feel like you're drafting over there, except for our Vegas league. You were drafting in the front, but most of the time I think that you kind of you're comfortable back there, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think I try to be comfortable, wherever it is with KDS. I was just wondering if when Rob left, if he was looking up the pronunciation of John Birdie's name or not.
Oh, did I
sort of had
that was
I
I was so,
I'm just teasing Dave.
I was so disgusted by John Birdie's pronunciation. I just had to go for a walk, just cool off for a few seconds, but I'm back. I'm okay. I'm okay now.
So we're not gonna have another Rob versus Gray PitchCon moment here.
Say it one more time, Dave. John Bertay.
Oh boy, John Birdie.
No,
I'm
you
in
said
rural,
it right.
I'm in rural.
My
Quebec
friends say
right
beer
now,
tea. I don't know.
Beer tea. There it is. There it is. Sounds like you're
in French. That would be the correct pronunciation. Just to be clear, it would be Bertie.
Aren't you Canadian, Rob? I mean, this should be your shit, right?
It is. I mean, hey, no swearing. Nick will intervene if.
Unbelievable!
I knew it.
Dave!
He's got to go to the penalty box.
Okay, the odds. I had to have been the favorite to drop the curse bomb, and my wife told me to set up a sign that said no cursing.
I would have bet on myself. I mean, I knew that was coming, so.
Shout out to Brandon.
But yeah, I think like, I don't know. I think you just need to be prepared, like wherever you are in KDS, to be able to draft. I think that's one thing that's, obviously you may like one position more or one position less, but we don't really control that. So being prepared regardless of what that KDS is.
You know why I like the turns? And it's something that Dave mentioned. Is I like being aggressive. I like being forced to go with your conviction and get your guys. I think there's a temptation when you're in the middle, and if you're an experienced player, you can avoid the temptation to take the values. Oh, this guy's been falling.
I want to
clarify.
Really
like him. I haven't really spent on any
difference between values and perceived values. Yeah. No, but like I'm not saying values according to like ADP. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. There's a temptation that this guy for the last 2 weeks has been averaging 64, and I'm here at 79. I have to take him now. Like, oh my God, this is incredible. And that never works out. If you don't like the guy, the fact that he's been falling is just
those guys are the ones that bust all the time.
And at the break, you can tell everybody, like, you'll never believe where I got him. It was amazing. And then you look back 2 months later and saying, I didn't like him. I spent no time all off season thinking about this guy. What was I doing? That doesn't happen to me at the end. At the end, there's no temptation for that. You just go for the guys you want there because you have no other choice. What else are you going to do?
ADP is not be able to be used as much as a benchmark when you're drafting on a turn. You can't really grasp for that. You're going to have to tell yourself, I've got to evaluate all of these guys and just take the guy that I like the best. And because you're going to be waiting 30 more picks, 29 picks, whatever it is, for your next two. And it like Rob's saying, is you got to go with your conviction. So I kind of like the turns as well myself, especially because I feel like you can have a better mold of fitting your team together each time because you're like, I can do this and this, and I know I'm doing it. I'm double tapping. I can kind of piece two things together each time. So I'm getting two Lego pieces instead of one. So it's all preference, as you were saying, Dave, and year to year. If you like somebody up front, then maybe you want to go, spread butter and go 1 through 15, etc.
Two starting pitchers, then two catchers.
We've seen that
Rob,
before.
Have you been spying on my draft plan?
I may have hacked into
your computer.
Man.
I could totally see
Are you going into Toby's computer now?
I could totally see Toby's board being pitcher, like JTR, Varsho. Let's go.
I actually don't draft players based on skill. The NFBC has those brightly colored, different things for different positions. I'm actually an artist. You guys don't know this, but I'm just like, it's the yellow and then the gray, like it's so bright and then it's a little dull. And then you bring in the util after that with like the turquoise and you're just like,
That's right.
This is really how like you draft for a 6 months of a 15-team league.
Yeah. Yep. Bob Ross,
this is why
crazy.
This is why people stayed home at 8:00 on a Saturday night to watch this kind of quality advice.
Well, have no fear. In about 25 minutes, Nick Pollock will be coming on to talk about 100 pitchers in less than or around 50 minutes. So there is definitely some goodness to come. So let's move on to Fab. I think that this is one of the bigger topics that we can discuss, especially when it comes to the difference in 15 teams to 12 teams. So we know how erratic the 12-team leagues can be. You can see a guy go for $300+ 30% of fab, and in some leagues he might only go for $1 if you just put the min bid in. So 15-team leagues are certainly a different animal when it does come to free agency and your auction bidding. So talking about managing it over the full season, I know that there's different strategies. Some people like to go extremely aggressive early, and then there's some people that have to have an X amount of dollars left in September to kind of execute their plan, or so to speak. But what if you're not in it at the end of the year, right? So there's all sorts of different conundrums that you have to deal with when trying to manage and your finances of your free agent auction bidding, which is $1,000. If you're not familiar with that, and then you spread that out once a week per week over at the NFPC in 15-team leagues, and that is on Sunday evening. So, Dave, you didn't want to go first on this one, and I haven't let Rob go first yet. So we'll go Rob, Dave, and then Toby on this topic. So
I thought you were going to send it over to Dave, anyways.
I also vote for Dave to go first.
Why you guys got to pick on me?
Dave, go.
No. You're going first.
Come on, Rob. Managing fab
sure.
over the full season.
So I think that one of the key. So the first thing in terms of fab is put in the work. It's not a money issue, but there's a direct correlation I find between how much work I put in on fab each week and how well I do in fab every week. So I've heard Toby talk about this. Is start the process early. If you're starting your process Sunday, am I frozen? Can you guys hear me?
No, no, you're not frozen.
Yeah, you're not frozen. You're good.
Okay. I'm frozen here. So if I start the process on Friday, and my process starts each week by, and I'm old school on this, is taking a piece of paper and starting to put out my roster for the following week in terms of who do I have for starting pitchers, what are their matchups, who can I use, who can I not use. Then each position, who do I have Monday to Thursday on the hitter side, who do I have Friday to Sunday, so that I can see visibly on that piece of paper where the holes are and who I'm cutting at the beginning of this week. And it seems so old school doing it this way, but I find it is so helpful in terms of organizing my thinking going into the overall process. In terms of the bids, I think it's really important to be very clear with yourself, with each player and each kind of line of players. Are these guys I'm looking at for 1 week, or is there potential for them to be long-term pickups? And by that, I mean, if I simply need an outfielder, ideally an outfielder who has, let's say, a 7-game schedule, who might get me a couple of home runs, 1 home run is realistically. Remember, if you're getting 1 home run from a streaming player, that's a 26 home run pace. So we can say, oh, it's easy to find 2 to 3 home run guys. There are actually not a lot of guys, in my experience, who are going to hit like 78 home runs a year, or even 50 home runs. So you're really trying to get like 1 home run, 4 runs, 4 RBIs. That's a 2,600 pace. So the bar for streaming is actually quite low each week, and it's actually not that easy to do. But you play the schedules and you play matchups and so on. But there's a big difference between I need an outfielder and I have 7 outfielders who all have decent schedules, are playing every day, and they're in some ways pretty fungible, versus this guy actually is a breakout. Like, I've been looking at his rolling charts. I've done the research. I think this guy could be on my team for the rest of the season. It is really important, I think, to be very disciplined, not to get caught up on this is a 1-week play, so I should bid $34 on this 1-week play. That's how you run out of money very quickly. And when you realize actually these 7 guys are all within $1 of each other, and we're kind of guessing what we're going to get, then you should be pretty agnostic which one you get. And that lets you keep your money a lot longer. I just need a middle reliever because I want to protect my ratios this week because I have some tough matchups. You should be able to put in bids on 15 middle relievers. You may have preferences, but none of them are Strider, right? None of them are Durant. None of them are like, this guy could be the guy, so I want to spend some real money to make sure I get him. It's like, I just need somebody who didn't pitch on Sunday, who has decent strikeout rates and has lots of games. That's how you save money. Big difference between and I need a closer. I didn't spend on closers, so I need to spend closers. Then you may not have no choice. Then it's like I'm spending big money. So I think being very honest with which category guys fall into is one way to manage your money through the season. Anyways, I'll stop there so Dave can get into this fab topic. He's been jumping at the bit to talk about.
But you know what, too, that when you're talking about if all these guys are being grouped into one, this is one of my biggest flaws is, for instance, the second or third week, when Robinson Cano was the starting second baseman for the Mets, instead of doing $2 to $3, the $7 to $9, if you continuously do little things like that, thinking, oh, I do need him. I do need him. I mean, how many people really need Robinson Cano or this bottom tier second baseman? Those the $4 to $5 each week, if you scale that back, it adds up a lot over time because you're placing multiple bids as well.
The biggest single paradigm shift I think people can make for fab is to recognize that while we think of the game as a season-long game, all the dollar values you see before the season and at the end of the season are season-long dollar values. All the projections are season-long projections. It is in fact a weekly game. So in the NFBC, it is, call it 26 weeks that we play it on the pitcher side. It's really 52 scoring periods on the hitter side. And all you're trying to do is maximize the statistics from those 26 weeks and the 52 hitting weeks. It sounds very facile, but I think as soon as you kind of wrap your head around that, then just pick up Robinson Cano for one of two reasons. One, because he's the best second baseman I can play this week. Or two, I think he's so good that I'm going to be able to play him for multiple weeks. But if the answer is no and no, then there may be a better option than Robinson Cano. Not to pick on Robbie Cano at this point, because it feels like beating down on a dead body at this point. But you get the point.
Yeah. Even asking yourself, how much sustainability does this player have, right? And then maybe scale a little bit. Asking yourself
sustainability, or I don't care about sustainability. I only care about the next 7 days, and then I'm going to move on for him and recognize that's okay.
Yes. Dave.
Yes.
Are you ready?
Yep.
Okay.
Yes. So, like I said, this, managing fab over a full season, it's definitely something that takes some practice, and it's definitely something that I'm really bad at. And I see a lot of people either on one end or the other. Either they're spending way too much of their money too soon, or they're not spending their money enough. I saw a lot of this in year one of Glarf, actually, where a lot of the people had all this money left at the end of the year. I had no money left, but I had used my fab dollars to get a lead, whereas they were all saving their money. I don't know what for. Like, I think people are just like, they kind of treat it like real life money. And it's like, okay, I need to be fiscally responsible, which is good to an extent, but you also don't want to save too much and go the other direction where you're not investing in the guys who can make a big impact and help you win. Like my boy John Berti did last year for me in the main event. Just kidding. But he was a huge help. So I personally, since I knew that was a flaw in my game specifically, for the main event a couple of years ago, I brought my friend Tony on as a co-manager, specifically to make sure that, like, to manage our money, to make sure I don't overspend. So every time, like, okay, I'm thinking I'm going to bid like, $28 on this guy, and he's like, do we need to spend $28 on him? Like, is it worth it? It's always good to have a sounding board, another person who you can say, okay, here's what I'm thinking for my fab bids, but then someone else kind of comes along and edits you, and they're like, no, we don't need to go that high. And he's actually really, really good at that. Like, where a lot of times I'm thinking like, no, I really think we do need to go this high. And he's almost always right. In like, when he's like, no, we don't need to go that high, we're going to go lower. And Rob was talking about, starting this early in the process, early in the week, you start adding guys to your fab list and everything. I'm terrible at this. Again, like I wait until Sunday because I'm like, well, there's still games going on. It's Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Things can change. Things are changing every day. Guys that I had on Tuesday might be irrelevant by Sunday. There's so many other guys by then. But it is a good way to do it, to look at, okay, here's the guys that we're going to drop. And I start with that too, Rob. I start with here's my drops, and then I look, okay, who are we going to add? If there's any holes, obviously you need to do that. Like, do not leave zeros in your lineup. always make sure even if you have to make a tough drop, sometimes you're going to have to drop guys that you don't want to. You got to do it. You can't take zeros. So, put your drops in, start adding to the list, and then you can kind of curate it throughout the week as you go along. But I'm telling you guys to do as I do, not do as I say, not as I do, because I don't do this. But it's helpful to put that way.
The old school method that both of you guys have now said about getting out a piece of paper. So, yeah, go to transactions, go to set lineup, and set a hypothetical of what you have currently, your roster, and set it and look at the schedule and see your first half of the hitters. What does the weekend look like? Who's on the fringe of being, cut? Who's getting the churn and burn? And then you write who to cut, and then not necessarily the player to add, but like, what do you add? Is it a category that you're looking to add? Is it a position you're looking to add? And then you can kind of just, filter down from there. So, it's old school, but I think it's helpful for all of us to do that.
And like you said, you got to look at it as 2 half weeks too. You have to look at it as the first half of the week and then the second half of the week, because you might have guys going to Coors for a half of a week and then they're not a play for the second half of the week. So you want to make sure that as much as you can maximize those at bats and make sure you don't take zeros as you go along. And I would say use like about 70% of your fab budget in the first half of the year and then save about 30% for the second half. But I mean, you can adjust the numbers as you see fit. Just make sure you're saving money. I would say $50 to $100 even for the final month and even for the last week. Never go to $0 ever. I don't care who you're adding. If Eloy Jimenez is out there like he was late in the year and you have $182, don't bid 182. Bid 150 or 155 or something like that. Save some money to make sure that you have at least something. Even if you're just making dollar bids, those dollar bids can be absolutely enormous because you're going to need those, especially with all the September call-ups late in the year and all that. The playing time changes so much at the end of the year. You just have to be able to add players. So if you're going to $0, you're essentially dead in the water at that point.
So I agree with that, but a fun fact: the main event overall winner, Rob Comatola, he had $0 remaining fab for like a month and a half.
Wow!
And still shipped it.
Well, I guess if you've got a good enough team and a big enough lead, I guess it can work out. But it never has for me.
Toby.
Yeah, I think generally agree with everything that Rob mentioned. I think one thing that he mentioned, which I would just highlight, is like, I think going into fab and thinking that 95% of it is totally luck is a really good way to go into it, in the sense that like the players are not good, right? There is very little difference largely on the waiver wire between a lot of the players that you're going after. And so to his point, I think thinking that there should be a huge difference in the amount that we're spending on each player generally is not necessarily the case. The only exception to that I would mention is that, one of the tools that I use is the Razzball player rater, or not player rater, but Razzball weekly projections that Rudy Gamble puts out. I think that's a fantastic tool just to see what the actual difference is. And I think one of the things that will teach you really quickly is that oftentimes the value that a player is generating is based on the number of games they have and who their opponent is, particularly what type of starting pitching that they're facing or the ballpark that they're in if you're in Coors or something like that. And so I think just really being mindful of that and knowing like I try to make the best decisions on my end in fab. And then, like these players suck. So they are likely not going to perform. But as Rob mentioned, like it doesn't take a whole lot. All you have to do is be right 4, 5, 6, 7 weeks, and you can actually accumulate like a pretty decent impact on your overall team. So I think that's one thing that I'd say, just going to it, like you have less than $40 a week to spend over the course of a season. So that's one of the things that I think of. So if I'm going to spend $300 early on in the year, all of a sudden I have 25 weeks and I only have $700. So now I'm down to under $30 a week that I have to spend. And so just kind of being mindful of that. And as you think about kind of just sustainability over the course of the full year, I do agree you want to spend more of that towards the beginning, as long as the opportunities are right, because I think one thing to also be mindful is that there's less competition late. So as much as we'd like to think like everybody like joins in and like even in the high money leagues, like everybody's in it to win it, there are always 2 or 3 teams that just don't have a shot and they check out. And so there is going to be less competition. And oftentimes those are the teams that have the most fab, or maybe they've spent a lot of fab. And so there is less competition. Lower bids can win later on in the year. So I think that's one thing to be mindful of. I think like doing some schedule peaking, like even like 1, 2, 3 weeks out ahead, like, you know, for hitters, like looking at, you know, this week, of course. For pitchers, I'm always looking at who's supposed to start in 2 weeks so that I don't have to like, you know, spend $40 on a player to get a good 2-step 1 week when I could do that, you know, a week before for like a handful of dollars. You know, that's not always possible, but I like to think about that. And even with hitters, like I think it's a really big, you know, it's really like a huge, like one of the really nice things about starting off really well is I feel like you can be more focused on the longer term. And so thinking about, okay, like, you know, the Dodgers, I'm just picking a crappy team. Like the Dodgers, you know, they play in Coors in 2 weeks, you know, and then after that, they're playing against the Pirates and the Cubs or something like that, you know, and I'll be like, oh, okay. Like, well, I'm actually going to pick up that Dodger guy because it looks like he's going to have a bunch of righties this week, you know, because I don't want to spend a bunch that week. That's one of the nice things. Sometimes you can't do that because you don't have all of the, like, you don't have enough drops, or, you know, you're just not in a position where you're able to do that. But if you are able to do that, just kind of doing some schedule peaking, sometimes, you know, it won't work out because the schedule changes or whatever. But I think that's something that's really helpful to do.
That's a big part. So let's say the Rockies are on the road for 7 games, but then the week after they're on a full homestand. So looking at any Rocky hitter that has, you know, sub 80% rostership percentage, they're likely available in a league, you know, maybe adding them and hoarding them on your bench if you're able to afford that. Or if it's like a crappy team like the Washington Nationals and Heimer Candelario is doing well against right-handed pitching, and the Nationals are going to be coming in not this week, but the week after for 4 games, and it's nothing but right-handed pitchers, let's just say, that would be the opportunity to add Heimer Candelario the week prior. So that is a big way for me to try and maximize, but you also have to have the, you know, the luxury of being able to potentially be hoarding, even like if you're looking ahead for a 2-step, like you said, Toby, you've got to be able to have that luxury of being able to cut somebody and just kind of have them stashed there for the week, you know, say, because if not, like these hitters that you see going into Coors the week of, they're going to cost so much more, you know, anywhere from 10% to 60 to 70% sometimes, because people are overly aggressive when they're streaming. So
It's to me, it's a reason why spend on closers, because I hear people who are like, look, I don't want to spend on good closers because I can find these guys, I'll hide them away. So I'll have 2 or 3 like promising high skill relievers, and one of them will get the job. Okay, now you have 5 bench spots. And then I also like streaming Colorado players when they're at home and on the road. So I have guys I can switch in and out, and it's like, okay, so now you have 2 bench spots. And I don't like it. The people who can make that work, God bless them. Like, I don't know how they do it.
And then you've got injuries to deal with.
Well, that's exactly it. It's like, and then you have one of your studs who goes down for 3 weeks, and it's like, well, I don't want to cut them because they'll be back in 3 weeks. So I think that, like, to tie this all together, a lot of the roster construction decisions you make, Toby pays up for catchers. Well, the good thing about paying up for catchers, as long as they stay healthy, is you're not spending $1 of fab screaming crappy catchers all week. If I'm drafting my catchers in the 29th and 30th round, that can work. Phil Dussault won the main overall, drafting literally in the last 2 rounds as catchers. But you have to acknowledge that you're going to spend $50 in fab picking up and dropping those catchers. If you don't spend on relievers, you need to have a couple $100 of fab set aside to pick up and find your saves through the season. If you don't spend the draft picks on really solid 6, 7, 8, 9, 10th starting pitchers, you are going to end up having to stream. So you need to have fab set aside to do that. All of it can work, but it all ties together. The decisions you make at the draft table will lead you. Again, injuries happen, you know, things don't work out, but you make certain decisions that set you up for fab. If you go pitching heavy, okay, so I'm going to stream hitters this year. I know I'm going to stream hitters. That's what I'm going to spend most of my fab on, is just churning guys to get plate appearances. Anyways, it's interesting.
Yeah, it is. Do you guys have I know that our buddy Scott Jenstead, he has like a close to X amount that he likes to hold for September. Do you guys go into the first 5 months saying I've got to have this, I got to have this, or do you run it organically?
I save some for the last month, probably too much, honestly.
Probably too much.
And I think that's one change that I would make is, I think, I don't think you can be too prescriptive where you're like, I need X amount left,
Sure.
right? You need to be able to kind of roll with it as the season progresses, but having a decent amount left over, I do think is critical just because like you are much more in tune with what your team needs at that point. You're like, 2 steals gets me here, 2 5Ks gets me here. And so having that knowledge, you can be a little bit more precise, but, and having that hammer is a beautiful thing to have, but you also don't want to miss opportunities earlier in the year because you're waiting for it.
It helps if you're Scott Jenstead and you know as a matter of fact that your team is going to be in the
content.
top 10 at the end of the season. So that can help motivate you to keep the money for the end of the year if you're Scott Jenstead.
That is valid. Dave, you mentioned that you do like to have 50 to 100. I believe this.
I like to, Maddie, but I never
Sure.
do. I mean, I have the opposite problem of Toby. I need to get better at saving more money. I think it's important to spend early, but I think it's that middle section of the season that I think that's where a lot of us overspend and like we're just we're throwing a couple extra dollars where we don't need to. And every year I try to get better at saving there.
Fab can really make a huge difference. I haven't been the greatest at it, through my tenure with playing at the NFBC and stuff. But last year, being able to hit on a few players just makes the world of difference. I mean, it can mask huge early round draft capital mistakes, etc. So there are certainly times to go in a little bit more aggressive than other times, but it's hard. You got to know when to pick your spots. And I've tweeted out a long time ago, and Toby talked about 95% luck, so to speak. And it's these fab purchases, or the bids that you're putting in, they really are just like scratcher tickets. You're kind of just, how much am I willing to buy that scratcher ticket for? And you start scratching off, and then at the end of the week you kind of see what you get. And sometimes they work out to be a little bit longer than usual.
Those Joey Meneses $1 bids paid off last year for sure.
The one thing that I forgot to add to that is it is luck, but it's almost like you want to get more, like having just 1 or 2 scratch tickets is not going to benefit you, but having like 40 or 50 over the course of the season, you're much more likely to hit that. And that's why I think not being too aggressive with your bidding is important.
Yeah.
So not to disagree on a baseball panel, but I don't think the scratch ticket analogy is great. I agree with Toby that it's a lot of luck. I think that you're trying to make tiny little improvements to your team in terms of probabilistic adds. So if you forget people playing in Coors, if you're just picking up guys who are going to get 4 extra plate appearances every week, mediocre guys, because I agree, they're all mediocre, but I'm just going to get 4 plate appearances more a week. Over 26 weeks, that's 100 plate appearances. And if they're all at the same skill level, that should be enough home runs, RBIs, and hopefully not a terrible batting average to move you up this much. If you happen to do that with 2, like double that, so you're picking up 2 guys, just get 4 extra plate appearances every week. Those are tiny little edges. Some are going to work out, some are not going to work out. But I don't think that you're looking for them to hit 7 home runs in a week. That's luck, obviously. It's just tiny little edges that add up to massive edges.
Not to disagree about disagreeing. I absolutely agree with what Rob just said.
Nick, thank you so much for inviting us on and having us be part of this wonderful thing that you've been doing. I don't know how you do it, but kudos to you.
Oh,
for
come
putting
on.
it on. It's incredible.
Thanks, Maddie.
This panel being concluded, Nick, with only one person swearing once, I actually think is pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
We've only had, I think, 2 swears, or 3 actually, this entire conference. Okay. It was Jan Scurio, Matt Kovac, and now Dave McDonald.
He remembers exactly. What was the time?
Of course I do.
That's your honor.
40 hours.
It's a yearly tradition, Nick. It's a yearly tradition.
No, the tradition is PitchCon being family friendly, not
Nick,
cursing. Even
My
Danielle
wife is
held
going to
it
be
in,
so proud of
and
me.
hers was all about swearing.
Nick needs the list of who not to invite back next year, Dave. And if he doesn't keep track, how does he know?
Dave, you know, it was really fun, but I guess it's just really hard. But no, really, guys, thank you so much for being a part of this. I'm glad it could work out. Whew, we're almost there, by the way. So this panel in particular really helped. I think this is actually the highest return we've gotten of any panel. Probably because it was 8 o'clock, but still, I'm going to say it was the people. I'm going to say it was
Wait,
the people
highest
involved.
return, like the most donations during
The
this
most
time?
donations, yes.
Oh my god!
Awesome. Are
I
we
wonder
there?
why.
Did we hit
We're all
10K?
we're all
We're
beautiful
not
people.
there yet. We are about 1,000
come on, guys,
away
let's
now.
go.
All right.
All
Well,
right,
let's
if
all
I'm
tweet
Rob
at
Silver, it's
all tweet at
1,000
Bob
away.
and-
But we are close. We are close. And I appreciate you all so much for being a part of this. Matt, Toby, Dave, Rob, thank you all
Thanks so much
much.
for
I'm
having
so
us.
sorry for making
Thanks,
fun of my
Nick.
Canadian accent.
Thanks for
Rob. I'll
coordinating,
never do it
Maddie. See you
again.
guys in Vegas.
Thank you
Yep,
guys.
thanks, Maddie. See you in Vegas.